For those of you who don't know my family, this is my son and my grandson. If you want to say how handsome they are, you can. Thank you. This is the way we must start to think. You and I are not here to save the world. We're here to save this emerging paradigm, which is about our regenesis. So much of our old thinking no longer is working. Would you agree? Yeah. Yes. Yeah? Yeah. And we're building a bridge. This is how I feel about myself. It's like I am now fairly comfortably positioned to be able to dance in both worlds. I can be over here in the health sector or work in the business sector, but I also have this really strong spiritual evolution happening here. And because I'm fairly grounded in it, or I feel I am, then I can dance in both. Do you know the word equanimity? Yep. Yeah? Anyone else know that word? Wonderful word. Equanimity is about being in flow. So rather than experiencing big peaks and troughs, we're going with the river. You know, we're letting the river take us, and you know, we move with the flow around rocks and over obstacles in flow rather than in resistance, because resistance is pain. When I reflect on my life, I'm 64, and I look back at over peak times, defining moments, times in my life when something significant has happened, and as a result I've made a major change. I didn't think they were devotional appointments at that time, but I am calling them that now. And one of the things I'm going to talk about a little bit further on is we have lost touch with ritual and ceremony in our own personal lives, in the extended life of family, and in the further extended life of community, in a way that other cultures have not. Other cultures are steeped in ritual, ceremony, and tradition. Not us so much. One of the things that I find about finding visual representation is once you put it on the page, you have begun to release it. So I started making art of all those losses, of all the things that had happened. It didn't have to be beautiful art, it could be a photograph, it could be just a sketch. And as you transfer it and have it move out of your body and onto the page, whether it's in writing, whether it's a picture, montage, so you start to release. And it's not in here, it's now out there. And out there, it's just a picture. Now, it may not happen the first time that you achieve that level of peace and calm around the event. But as you move through, and as you do it, you see that it's actually no longer here. The person who was presenting had worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, some of you might know her name, and he was coming along the front row, and I sat in the front row because I'm that kind of girl, you see. And as he's coming along, there were 400 parents in the room who had lost their children. So you can imagine the energy. And he's asking them, you know, what was your child's name? As he's coming along, and I thought, I hope he doesn't ask me, because I didn't give her a name. I just called her baby Armitstead. But a friend who was with me, she said, no, that's no worry, chicken. She said, we'll have a naming ceremony. And so we did, and I called her Willow. The first person, the first healthcare worker that I ever talked to about joyology and my intentions was Andrew Thompson at Starship Hospital. And Andrew Thompson sent me a song on CD, or tape deck, by Paul McCartney called Bend Little Willow. This is why journaling is so important. As you journal and make your notes on the page and gather the stories and the little events, you start to see paradox and synchronicity. You'll see the ebb and flow. And there'll be, from what begins as a lot of distortion and pain, will start to look like wisdom. I love that he also says it's also the midwife. What's the midwife about? Yeah, birthing. So what we're experiencing now, and I'm talking collectively, like here in the illustration, is humanity. We are being reborn. So we're coming through again. I don't know if anyone remembers the first time, but it was probably a bit tough. And now we're doing it in a different fashion. I talked at a conference in Dunedin maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and I was the last person on the day, like today. And when I walked in, the organiser said, "Oh, thank God you're here. It's been awful." Real estate group, 100 men. She said one of our members hung himself last night. And she said, so all the presenters have come and done their thing and gone, and at morning tea there's been no talking, just the clattery of cups and cutlery, and lunch was the same, no talking. And I'm on next, and I'm actually meant to be funny. And I said, right, so how, what do you want to do about this? And she said, oh, well, we were hoping you'd have an idea. And I said, well, I do. I said, let's go in when you're ready and behave as if you have not told me. And I want you to tell me again the whole story. How his wife found him, came home, opened the garage door, and there he was hanging, and the circumstances of his life and the apparent happiness of this man who was successful. I said, and you're doing that in front of them will give me permission to speak. And I'm not much for prayer, but I made a prayer. I just made it up, something, that spoke into the space of how I thought they might be feeling, and for all of us to just have a moment's silence for this man who was their colleague and friend who had passed. And then I talked about the elephant in the room for a little while. And then I said, now look, I've been charged to come here, and I've done 4 other presentations with other real estate around the country, and my talk is funny. With your permission, I want to give the same talk. And they gave me permission, and off I went. But every single thing that I said that day landed in a totally different way to the 4 other times. And I was about halfway through, and one man said, stop, Pat, please. And he pulled his business card out, and he said, Pat, we all have on our business card the title Property Valuers. He said, I'm wondering, it just has come to me now, if we called ourselves another name other than property valuer, whether we might have noticed something, whether we might have been more aware of the person than the property. I went to a presentation in Australia quite some years back, and a statistician gave this talk for an hour on all the statistics for all the health and drama and stuff that might go on in anyone's life. And it was pretty boring. But what I got was, oh my God, every time I see 100 people together, because that's how many were in the room that night, any or all of these conditions or circumstances, illnesses, could be either influencing them personally or they know somebody. So I know now, every time I go to the door, I know who I could be meeting. When I first met Rosalind, I interviewed Rosalind for a TV program over in Australia, and one of the things that struck me was, for goodness sake, this woman who has had 10 years or more of more than most people ever have to deal with in a lifetime, still has a very wonderful, rich and meaningful life, even though this is happening. I love the term quilt of community. You know, we've got that here now, right? We've already created threads in the communication. All kinds of weaves have happened over the day, and while most of you only know each other perhaps from today, there's already something there. A fabric has begun, and it can grow. And the warp and the weft will become more distinct. Anyone ever done any weaving? When you've pulled the threads tight, it's only when they're all tightened up and pulled together that you start to see the pattern. I was sitting on the bus on the tour with Patch one day, and he said, he started sharing with me about his mother, who was a diabetic, and she'd recently had one limb removed as a result of poor circulation, a complication of diabetes. And he said, I was there when she woke up from the anaesthetic, and he's really tall, he's 6'8", really long arms, so he's there at the bedside as Ma's coming out of the anaesthetic, eyelids fluttering, these are his words, and he's like, well, Ma, now you know what it's like to have one foot in the grave. And when I talked to Patch before going, he said, don't come because of me, Pat. Come because you want to find and spend your clown self. Come because you want to experience for yourself the disparity between rich and poor. Come because you'd like to make at least one Russian friend. Sometimes it's so violent, it's more like a punch. The death of a loved one, a serious illness or injury, a freak accident, a violent crime. At other times it's somewhat gentler. Flood, disaster, betrayal. Sudden flash of envy when somebody's got what we want. We need to consider those smaller times too, because grief and loss is cumulative. Anyone who's had a loss will know that 5, 10, 15 years down the track, while the anguish may have faded, the loss doesn't disappear. It doesn't go away. Being able to take a stand for something that matters actually dignifies our suffering. When we don't have presence and we don't have purpose, that's when we get lost.